Hey everyone, this is the Heroes podcast. I'm back again with Kelly Kessler. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this.
Yes, me too, because we had so much in our stories. But for everyone to know who we are meeting here today is Dr. Kelly Kessler is a licensed physical therapist, transformational coach, host of the globally ranked podcast Rewiring Health, the owner of Optimal You Health and Wellness, and mom of two boys. Kelly helps high achieving women recognize and heal from dysfunctional patterns of abandoning themselves and the health impacts of stress through nervous system regulation and subconscious mind programming. Kelly guides her clients through personal transformation to step into their own power, reclaim their worth, and honor health and inner peace. Well, I'm really excited. This is a mouthful, but and there's more. Would you take us back to maybe the beginning? Have you had challenges? Have you had? How did this start?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I'm going through, I had no idea that there was like a common theme going on in my life. But yeah, plenty of challenges. So it started in my 20s when I was going through an eating disorder, and it was really just this like path of feeling like some kind of sense of control in my life. And I'll kind of talk about the theme that I see in all of these, but these are the challenges I faced. Had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. Um, After 6 years, really didn't engage in those eating disorder behaviors anymore, but still dealt with a lot of the emotional turmoil of that. And then experienced chronic back pain in my mid 20s. I lived with that for way into my 30s. And just it always is exacerbated every time I felt stressed or just had a lot going on in my life. The pain would just increase to the point where like I would have to get out on my way to work, step out of the car just to move my back, get back into the car, and then keep going. There were points where I was using like a stick just to get myself up to a standing position because my pain was in that much it was that intense. So this I lived with for years, and this is before I was a physical therapist. So, I had gone to practitioners. They looked at, did x-rays, and they're like, your L4, L5 is half the height it should be for a 25-year-old. And I'm like, okay. At this time, I didn't really know much. I was like, well, what do I do about it? And they're like, well, there's nothing you can do. It's just degenerative. It's going to keep getting worse. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, here I am in my 20s. I'm a physically active person. And now like I'm on this trajectory that's not really good. And so fast forward, I end up going into physical therapy school, thinking like, okay, now I can finally help myself with all that's going on. I would put myself through the physical aspects of it and the stretches, the manipulations, the strengthening, and I would get some relief, but then it would come right back. And I'm like, great, now like I can't even help myself, and I know about the body, and I'm like, what is going on here? And so it really came to a head, and like I'm really just fast forwarding all this, but this is years of what's been going on, but came to a head during the pandemic when I was working full time. I was also working a part-time job. My husband was working full time. We were the general contractors building our house. I was 9 months, I was pregnant at the time. While we were doing that, I was commuting an hour each way, just like completely exhausting myself, and ended up getting furloughed. And it was really such a blessing in disguise because it gave me this complete moment of pause to really reflect back on my life. And at that time, now I had a 9 month old. I'm looking at him, I'm like, where have I been? And so I was physically there, but mentally and emotionally just completely checked out from like all this buildup of just feeling like I'm just constantly going, exhausting myself, feeling like I'm never doing enough, I'm not enough. And that was the theme that was really playing out in so many aspects of my life of feeling like I'm not enough. So I have to work harder. I have to do more. I have to exhaust myself. I have to look a certain way. So it manifests in the eating disorder earlier on, because if I look a certain way, then it'll prove that I'm enough. And then I carried this guilt and shame throughout my whole life, and that became the manifestation of the back pain that I carried. And then it became again like I have to just hold it all together. From the outside, it looked like I had everything together, but in the inside, I was really suffering. And then that became the what I was experiencing in that moment. I feel like it was just in that moment of slowing down, I just was kind of hitting that point of like, I don't want to live like this anymore. and I have to do something. And it was really that moment I started to realize like I have to change what I'm doing. Something's not working because I've spent now several decades of feeling like I'm just constantly exhausting myself, working over and over and over again to feel this sense of fulfillment in my life, and it's just empty.
So how many years was this? I can't even call it recovery because I understand
Yeah.
that you were not recovering for a very long time.
Mm-mm.
And have you been able to trace it back to specific this guilt and shame, would you say?
Yeah, so a big part of my healing process was actually doing a lot of inner child healing. So looking back into my childhood, I I can see things and things that I experienced, themes that I experienced that seem so subtle and like to anyone probably would seem like nothing. Like I didn't experience any like overarching trauma or anything that was really like in your face, but it was these little things and messages that I was getting that I really then harbored, and it was those things that were carrying out. Like I'm worthy if I'm productive. I'm worthy if I get straight A's. I'm worthy if I look a certain way. I'm worthy if I make a certain amount or have a good job and I'm the good girl and I do everything that's expected of me. It was these themes and stories that I was telling myself, and it just was showing up over and over and over again in my life. But it was really that which opened the door to realizing like that this isn't my truth, and that I can create a different story for myself and allow myself to release a lot of those emotions.
And would you say it was mom, dad, where most of this came from?
Yeah, so I mean, big thing for me is like I never want to blame anybody for my experience, but I can definitely see patterns in behaviors, in how emotions were processed or not processed really in that time, and the vulnerability that I wasn't really able to experience in my childhood. So there's definitely things that I experience now that I realize like, wow, that's probably why I was feeling so challenged with some of those things back in my earlier years, and I didn't know how to handle it. So I just handled it in whatever way I thought would help it at the time. But in hindsight, I just realized I was grasping at straws externally to fix something internally, but that was never going to be the solution. So I really had to go in deep within myself and start to understand myself, the roots and the beliefs that I've developed throughout my life.
And what sort of method, like what helped you the most? Or what were the three things, let's say, that I understand there was the normal medical
Mhm.
things, but when it came to emotional transformation, healing, letting go, you said inner child work. Who was helping you? What sort of modalities have they used?
Yeah, so I would say it kind of came in phases. So the first thing I started doing what I knew was to go through the body. So I just started watching. I mean, at that time I was furloughed. I just started watching YouTube videos, learning about breath work, doing yoga videos, like just slowing down my system. So I was always been like that high intensity workouts, like do more, burn more calories. And it was like at that time I just started like slowing things down, starting to get into my body, starting to regulate my nervous system, understanding my nervous system and the stress response I was in. So I feel like that really opened things up for my mind because I really was in survival mode. So I don't think I would have been receptive to any kind of changes in my mental and emotional state until I got my body into a better place of being able to receive things. So I helped my body transition out of that survival mode more into like that parasympathetic state. And I realized this in hindsight. I had no idea what I was doing back then, but I realized that's really what was happening is like I was starting to help myself and my nervous system transition. And then, I had hired a coach, but the coach was for business back then. So I hired a business coach in 2021, and part of that program was to do all these different wellness aspects of it, and it was non-negotiable. Like it was part of the system. So you had to show up for yourself. And that really became a big transition where my self-care was always on the back burner when I had time, when it was convenient, but that because of the financial commitment I had made, I then became non-negotiable. So like I had to do all these things. Like I was drinking water, I was eating no sugar, I didn't drink any alcohol, I was working out for an hour a day, I was reading every day, I was journaling every day. So there were like certain things that I was doing every day, and it was almost like a jolt to my system. And I did this for 3 months straight of all those things every single day, didn't miss a day. And it really, like, I started to experience life differently. It felt a little lighter, it felt a little bit better. And then it became almost like I want more of this. And then through the reading, it was like a breadcrumbs. I would find one author that really resonated with, follow their work. Then it would expose me to another author, and then I'd follow their work. I would be listening to podcasts. Like I was just inundating myself with new information, new ways of looking at life. And I really believe all those seeds that got planted then became the rewiring that was happening in my mind. And this took time, but there's so many things. Like I think about how I thought 6, 7 years ago. Like I was really in a victim mindset of like, what's happening to me? Why was always the way things work out? And what else is going to happen? And it's like those are the questions I asked myself. But now I'm much more empowered to realize that, like, how is this working for me? And I can look back on my life and realize that everything really was there for a reason to create this version of me today, and has really helped me in the long run.
What I'm curious about is you've come a long way. Clearly,
Mhm.
you have been putting more and more effort and more commitment into this journey,
Mhm.
like probably most people who get results. Uh, would you say there were must-haves in this journey that it wouldn't have worked if you did not have specific bigger breakthroughs?
Mhm.
What would you say?
Yeah, so a big part of this was like I've always been spiritual, but like never really had a like strong like practice spiritually. And ironically, in this time, about a year and a half ago, I lost my brother unexpectedly. And that really became such a catalyst because he was only 41. And it really became a catalyst in my life of like realizing like you have to embrace life now. And it really became a catalyst in me connecting more spiritually and committing more time to meditation, committing more time to slowing down, connecting. And so I feel like that's also been a huge part in this, as well as just like honoring myself more and realizing that like your life, you don't know when it's going to end. Like everything is so finite. So for me, where I am today, like I've grown a lot in those 6 years, but I feel like it's been exponential since that time, because it's just given me a whole new perspective on life and to appreciate things, to look at it with gratitude, and really just surrender to the experience and accept life as it is, and to make the most of it. And so that's also really given me a strong spiritual connection in this last year and a half. So every aspect of it I think had to be there, but absolutely making myself a non-negotiable, the spiritual connection, and then honoring my emotions has been a huge part of it. I didn't realize how much I was gaslighting myself, downplaying things, not acknowledging them or dismissing myself. And really now, like when I had to come face to face with so many emotions in 1 year, um, it really became paramount that I had to allow myself to experience that and feel it and realize that I'm going to be okay even through some of the darkest times.
That must have been a profound journey, and
Mhm.
yes, I believe um, it's such a hard work to do this to oneself.
Mhm.
I almost see it impossible to
Mhm.
then switch on feelings that are uncomfortable. Like probably the biggest finding that I come across is people are stuck in this because the mind does everything to not feel the discomfort, not go to those places where the butterflies are in the stomach, and we just don't know what to do with it. And I think that's where we could call them mentors,
Mhm.
coaches, therapists. I don't like the the labels, but
Mhm.
where someone is able to create this space
Mhm.
of vulnerability where this could all be brought up
Mhm.
and have the tools to release it. Would you say that was a big part of your healing as well, to have someone with you in these times of transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I truly believe we're here to help, kind of that past version of ourselves. And so I've had many people who've guided me along in this. And, I've gone to mediums. I have gone to, I was seeing a therapist for a long time. I've gone to classes, I've gone to workshops. So, like, I didn't have just one mentor that was there for me, but I had people who I felt like were placed in my life at the right time. And I needed to hear their message at that time. And then it's like, then someone else was placed in my life or a workshop was placed in my life. And then there were definitely mentors along the way that have helped me see myself differently and see life differently and have really just expanded my capacity to understand myself. And so, yeah, I think it's really hard sometimes to hold space for ourselves, especially when we're in the midst of like chaos in our life. So, having somebody to just hold that space, maybe ask you the right questions, help you self-reflect is paramount. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely been a huge part of my journey of having the supports along the way.
What would you what would you recommend to someone who has this feeling of I have to hold myself back, I cannot be me because they don't accept me or I don't seem to fit in. I have these belonging issues or I don't know where I belong. What's the fastest? And I know this is a very generic question,
Mhm.
but let's say if you had been back then,
Mhm.
what would you recommend to accelerate the journey to the authentic you?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question because looking back, it's like, okay, what was the most transformational part of it? I think part of it was just asking myself different questions. So for me, when I transitioned from thinking like life is happening to me to then life is actually happening for me, I started asking myself, like, what is the lesson in this? What do I need to learn from this? And I mean, even through some of like the hardest times, I would ask myself that question. I might not have the answer right then and there, but that question allowed me to extract the lesson to help me move forward in that moment. And so I truly believe I got answers as I went along the journey just by asking myself better questions. So I think that was a huge part. And the perspective shift from victimhood to empowerment is just asking yourself, how is this working for me? What do I need to learn? And how do I move forward in this moment? I think another part is too is like giving yourself space to feel what you need to feel. And so for me, I didn't realize until I started feeling emotions how much I just put a band-aid on them and went into autopilot. Like for me, it was productivity and exercise were my coping mechanism. So I would go work. Like I would just work like a dog and then I would also like exercise like crazy. Like, I mean, I would be out, I mean, in my 20s, I'd be exercising till 3 a.m. And it was just an avoidant technique. And so for me, I started allowing myself just to feel those emotions. And that was so foreign to me because I didn't realize how disconnected I was from my own emotions. And I'm still learning. Like it's still a work in progress of like, okay, what am I feeling? Like, how do I feel this? How is it being expressed in my body? But giving yourself that permission of like right now if like I'm gonna feel anger and I'm gonna allow myself to feel anger and not feel guilty for it because for me suppressing anger was really part of my past journey. I really believe that's why I experienced back pain. I was carrying this burden of like feeling emotions but having no way to actually let them go through me. I was just shutting everything down each time and suppressing them. So that's another thing I think is absolutely paramount and part of that is just allowing ourselves to feel the emotions and then tuning into our body. So for me, it was so much rumination in my head. I would get into these negative cycles of like thinking like, trying to plan out everything. What is that person going to say? Or like, what are they thinking of me? Or like, trying to play out conversations. How can I say this? And I was like trying to be 3 steps ahead in everything. And so for me, it was really like tuning into like my body and being like in my body rather than in my head. So like, expressing gratitude, coming into my heart and just feeling gratitude. And this is a process. It's not like, you do this and then everything is great. Like I had to rewire everything to actually feel like this came more naturally. But I just started to realize like the most important person to acknowledge their opinions like is myself. Like I was making everybody else's opinion more important than my own. And I'm not even living for myself. I'm just living to keep the fires out in the external world. But meanwhile, I'm the only one suffering to do it. And so, really coming back into myself, acknowledging my values. What do I want for this life? Even if it creates turmoil in the outside world, it really gave me so much empowerment within myself to realize like I'm worthy of that in this moment. But it's all takes steps to get to there.
It strikes me such a parallel journey that we have had. I turned my father's anger toward
Mhm.
myself, and I somehow started to have to whip
Mhm.
and beat myself up, and having exactly those scenarios that you talk about. When I wanted to achieve something, then I created 100 scenarios, and I was not in the present ever.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there is that new stage that you must have arrived to, is when things start to flow,
Mhm.
when there is space to tap into downloading or being in the moment. And I don't even want to know the questions anymore. I have
Mhm.
that trust that you
Mhm.
talk about, where at that moment I'll be ready.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
what happened? There has been so much that you have been able to create.
Mhm.
How would you describe your services these days? Like, who are your typical clients? How do you help? Who you help?
Yeah. So I help me a few years ago. So the girl who is ruminating on negativity, feeling like they're not enough, trying to constantly keep everything together on the exterior, putting on a smile, going through the day, high functioning, but yet in your own space, you know what it's costing you, and what it's costing you is you are watching your life pass you by and you're wondering when's my turn, like when do I get to feel the way I want to feel, when do I get to feel fulfilled and free. And so that's who I help today is the person who I was a few years ago, and just getting to this point where you realize that like you are worthy of your own time and energy. You're worthy of investing in yourself. And even if the external world is unraveling, it's you recognize how much your internal world is coming together in that moment. And so it is just this place of freedom that you can experience. And so I help people through, I have an online community that I host, and really just it's a lot of women who are experiencing those things that feel like they want more, don't know how to get there, feeling like life is just chaotic, it's always going, and just want to feel some sense of calm and peace within their life, and to also take care of their health too, because a lot of them are experiencing health impacts of that from the unrelenting stress of it all.
Do you see parallel reality between men and women? I understand that you're focusing on women, and I love that you've been clear about it.
Mhm.
I don't make that distinction. Um, do you see some patterns more typical in women that you would say men have to face? What is your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those can easily be experienced by men too. So it's not that like men don't experience these things. I think socially, a lot gets put on the woman as being like the mom that has to show up, and then you're also the one who has to work now, and you're also the one who has to like try to hold it all together, and it almost feels like the burden that everything's on your shoulders. And it doesn't mean that men don't feel that either. Men absolutely feel that. And so, I hope this message can also help men as well. But yeah, I primarily focus on women because I feel like I just can understand that perspective, and that um going through life as a female, some of the challenges that you face of feeling like you're the one who has to hold it together so much in so many aspects of your life. So, but yeah, 100% men. I've come across many men who experience these things very much so, and do feel that burden, and do feel that lack of fulfillment, are trying to work their butts off to feel like they're enough, and are really struggling. And I think one thing with men is like, I think probably struggle even more so with that like emotional expression, because again, as a society, it's usually, women can express it more freely than often men do. So that can be a really, really challenging thing that can manifest into all these things as well. So yeah, I mean, I think these are human challenges that we all experience.
Yes, I believe I did come across quite a few women who, when they had children,
Mhm.
there was just so much happening that they have lost themselves. There
Mhm.
was so much to so many people to satisfy that they lost their self-worth. While I believe man has these tendencies that, oh, if I earn enough money, that means I love my family, and that was me certainly too.
Yeah.
And that just does not translate. It's
Mhm.
it's not what they need.
Mhm.
Uh, they probably want, yeah, to hold that space
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
probably more help at home.
Mhm.
Uh, are you teaching women to create that new version of that relationship where they are able to, well, pull the man in to the emotional side of living together and helping the children? Do you have that in your program?
I would say not directly. Directly, what I help women do is the relationship with themselves, because I find that once the relationship with themselves is more fulfilling and whole, then those things outside themselves tend to improve as well. So I indirectly, most likely help that, but it's really helping women really come home to themselves and realize they're worthy of their own time and energy, and really unlocking some of the belief systems that have held them back, and reworking those belief systems, and then implementing some of the behaviors that enforce some new belief systems. But really, a lot of it is just coming back into the body, feeling what you need to feel within your body, recognizing what your values are, what's the vision for your life without any external forces playing on that. And then how do you start to transform your mind and your emotions to mirror what your vision for life is?
I'm wondering, and I understand that is profound. I believe, ideally, when one is in sync with self and emotions,
Mhm.
everything should fall into place. Ideally.
Mhm.
Have you come across a few cases where and I've seen this a few times, where one steps into her power, and it's a woman, in a family, then there are certain triggers start to happen because she doesn't take that what she did before without a word, or without saying, without raising her voice, all of those things.
Mhm.
Have you had those experiences with your clients, and how did you help them through it?
Yeah, so I've not only had it with my clients, but I've had it personally. in that when I started to evolve and my tolerance became less for certain behaviors and things in my life, my external world did start to unravel. So there's a real part of grief that also comes along with this. So I never want this, evolution to feel like sunshine and butterflies and everything is just an upward spiral. There are a lot of things that you're going to experience that it is ultimate grief. And I've lost some very significant relationships in my life through this because the version of myself that fit in those relationships was a version that was self-sacrificing, that stayed silent, that was the good girl, did everything I was supposed to do, did follow the expectations of others. And once I started to change that version, those relationships really fizzled out, and not if they just came to an end. So, and it's immense grief in that because those are very important relationships to me, but yet I was not willing to lose myself anymore. And once you have this realization that you are worthy of your own love, and then it's really a challenging position to be in because you do start to see how your life is really fraying outside yourself. So it can almost give you this like false perception of like, what am I doing? My life is falling apart. Like, is this really the right path for me? You can start to question some of this because externally you're getting evidence that like everything's falling apart. But there's such a knowing in me now. There's such a love. I've never experienced love for myself like this. That's something I've always felt like was elusive. There's a feeling of freedom in myself and liberation and excitement and hope that it just makes you realize that like how different that is, that like you were losing yourself all along. And once you start to find yourself, you're willing to lose things outside yourself so that you don't lose yourself again. And that's where I am today. So yeah, I mean, that's a real experience. And I've had clients too that have had that experience too. It's like as they start to grow, some people in their lives were not on the same trajectory, and there became a bigger gap between where they were and the people in their lives. And it just becomes like you're not resonating at the same level anymore. So there becomes a disconnect. And sometimes it just things kind of fizzle out. They lose friendships, and things like start to just kind of come away from their life. But then they also gained a lot too. So they start to gain new relationships that align with this version of themselves. And I've seen that in my life too. It's like I've lost relationships, but I've also gained some awesome relationships that are really more aligned with who I am today. So it is part of the journey. And I think it's so important to talk about that grief, that external loss is real, and you will likely experience it because the past version of yourself fit a story in someone else's life, and as you change, it may not fit the same way, and most likely it will not fit that same way. And so inevitably there does become loss in this as well.
Yeah, that's deep.
Hmm.
And I was just thinking the other day about some of the friendships that I had 15, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
I'm Black in a country where I was born,
Hmm.
and I can't get myself to go back to that place
Hmm.
because the old version of me is not available to to carry on with
Hmm.
those relationships. And reality has shifted. Obviously, I've done so much growth ever since. So how to, if someone wants to get engaged with you, follow your content, what's the easiest, what's the best way to find you? You have a website or a Facebook group? Teach us.
Yeah. Yeah, so best place is my website. It's optimalu, healthandwellness.com. And then from there you can connect to my socials. I'm under Dr. Kelly Kessler under all social media as well. So feel free to send me a message on there.
What would you say? What have I not asked you, Kelly, uh, in this conversation? And thank you very much for your deep thoughts and wisdom. What would you have wanted to tell us today?
Yeah, so I just to kind of add on to really what I've been kind of talking about is that a quote that's really helped me through this and just helped me see life through a different perspective was a quote by Albert Einstein, and it's no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so this really resonated with me because I realized that there were so many problems that I was experiencing in my life. And without ever evolving internally, I was just trying to solve a problem, but I had no resources to actually do that. So nothing was ever actually changing until I did the internal work. And I recognized that I had to elevate my level of consciousness to see myself clearly and more clearly. And so for anyone who's listening, recognize that like things will continue in your life. You'll see different patterns in your life and you'll see things repeat. And that's what I noticed, that like there were repetitive patterns. They looked different, but it was the same theme, same pattern over and over again. It's like what people, get into a relationship and then they dump them and then they get like almost the same person. It's just, personality wise. And they're like, why do I attract this person? It's because we continue to get similar things in our life until we learn the lesson from it. So we have to extract the lesson. We have to be able to realize what we need to gain from that. And so everything placed in our life is helping us move forward. But it only helps us move forward if we recognize what we have to learn from each of those scenarios. So, and that's what helps you elevate your consciousness. So extract the lessons from each thing within your life. And that also helps you stop ruminating on it. There's a reason why you ruminate, is because you haven't quite learned the lesson that you need to learn. And so once you can extract the lessons, how is this helping me? How is this moving me forward? Then that's when you can start solving some of those problems that you maybe have been experiencing.
Well, that's very insightful. And don't hesitate to shortcut the journey. You can get hold of Kelly. I'm pretty sure you can book a small call with her, so you don't go in circles for the next 5 or 10 years. Thank you very much for your time. It was a wonderful share from you, Kelly, and about what you've gone through.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on, and I really just hope this message helps somebody.
Absolutely. See you soon.